It's 6:30 in the morning in a small apartment just outside a busy American city. The alarm goes off for the third time. Jake finally opens his eyes, already tired. Not physically tired, but mentally drained. The kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. He reaches for his phone, not to check messages, but to check his bank balance. $312. That number sits there, staring back at him like a warning. Rent is due in 5 days. His car payment hits tomorrow. Credit card bill in 3 days. And groceries? He'll have to figure that out later. Jake isn't lazy. He isn't irresponsible. In fact, he works full-time, sometimes overtime. On paper, he earns around $4,200 a month. A few years ago, that would have sounded like success. Today, it barely feels like survival. Hi, my name is Bryony, and I spend way much time thinking about why people who look financially reckless are sometimes better prepared for disaster than people who did everything right. If you've ever felt vaguely unsettled about how dependent your entire financial life is on one company, subscribe and hit the like button. He gets out of bed, walks into the kitchen, opens the fridge. Half a carton of milk, some eggs, leftover takeout from 2 nights ago. He closes it quietly, like the less he looks, the less real it feels. This is what living paycheck to paycheck actually looks like in America. Not poverty in the traditional sense, not homelessness, but a constant, invisible pressure. A life where money comes in and disappears almost immediately. Jake's story isn't unique. In fact, it's incredibly common. Across the United States, millions of people wake up every single day with the same thought. Will I make it to the next paycheck? It doesn't matter if they earn $2,000 a month or $10,000. The cycle is the same. Income comes in, bills take it away, and what's left is almost nothing. Jake gets ready for work. He checks his gas tank, just enough to last 2 days. He considers filling it up now, but decides against it. Better to wait until after payday. Always waiting. On the drive to work, he passes expensive neighborhoods, big houses, new cars, clean sidewalks. It looks like everyone is doing well, like everyone has figured life out. But looks are deceptive. Many of those people are also living paycheck to paycheck. The difference is just scale. Bigger house, bigger mortgage, newer car, bigger loan, higher income, but even higher expenses. The system isn't just about how much you earn, it's about how much you spend and how much you owe. Jake reaches his office, a normal corporate job, air conditioning, coffee machines, meetings. From the outside, it looks stable, respectable, safe. Inside, it's a different story. At lunch, conversations aren't about investments or financial freedom. They're about rising rent, increasing grocery prices, medical bills, and side hustles. One coworker drives for a rideshare service after work. Another sells products online. Someone else is trying to learn trading, hoping to break out of the cycle. Everyone is working. Some are working 2 or 3 jobs. And still, it's not enough. By the time Jake finishes work, it's already evening. He's exhausted, but the day isn't over. He opens his laptop and logs into a freelance platform. A few extra dollars here and there. It's not much, but it helps. Or at least it feels like it does. Hours later, he finally lies down. But sleep doesn't come easily, because his mind is doing math.
So he uses another credit card, or takes a personal loan, or delays a bill. Each decision feels small, temporary, manageable. But over time, it builds into something much bigger. Debt. Debt is the silent engine behind the paycheck-to-paycheck lifestyle. It allows people to survive today by sacrificing tomorrow. Jake didn't start here. A few years ago, he was actually doing okay. He had some savings. Not much, but enough to feel safe. Then came a series of events. His rent increased. Groceries became more expensive. Gas prices went up. Then one day, his car needed repairs. $1,200. He didn't have it, so he used a credit card. That was the beginning. After that, it became normal. Whenever something unexpected happened, he used credit. It felt like a solution. Quick, easy, invisible. Until it wasn't. Now, a significant portion of his income goes toward paying off past expenses, not building wealth, not saving for the future, just paying for the past. And that's the trap. Living paycheck to paycheck isn't always about low income. Sometimes it's about high expenses, debt, and a system designed around constant consumption. Everywhere Jake looks, he's being told to spend. New phone releases, streaming subscriptions, sales, discounts, offers. Even social pressure plays a role. Friends going out, social media showing perfect lifestyles. It creates an invisible expectation to keep up, and keeping up costs money. So people spend, not because they're irresponsible, but because it feels normal, because everyone else is doing it, because saying no feels like falling behind. But every yes has a cost. Jake scrolls through his phone at night. He sees influencers talking about financial freedom, passive income, retiring early. It sounds great, but also distant, because his reality is different. His reality is figuring out how to make it to the next paycheck. And that gap between what people see online and what they experience in real life creates frustration. It makes people feel like they're doing something wrong, like they're failing. But the truth is more complicated. The cost of living in many parts of the United States has increased dramatically over the years. Rent alone can take up 30%, 40%, even 50% of someone's income. Add utilities, transportation, food, insurance, and suddenly there's almost nothing left. Saving becomes difficult, investing becomes impossible, and one mistake can push everything off balance. Jake's situation isn't extreme. He's not at rock bottom, but that's exactly why it's dangerous, because it looks normal. It feels manageable, until it isn't. Until something breaks, until a missed payment turns into a penalty, until stress turns into burnout, until the constant pressure becomes overwhelming. And this is the hidden side of the American dream. From the outside, it looks like opportunity. From the inside, for many people, it feels like a treadmill, running faster and faster, but staying in the same place. Jake closes his eyes. Tomorrow will be the same. Wake up, check balance, go to work, try to manage, hope nothing goes wrong, and wait for the next paycheck. Because right now, that paycheck isn't progress, it's survival.
Jake didn't always feel this pressure in his chest. There was a time when money was just money. Something that came in, something that went out. It didn't feel like a constant weight sitting quietly in the background of every decision. But over time, things changed. Slowly at first, almost unnoticeable. Then, all at once. It started with small shifts. A rent increase that didn't seem too bad at the time. An extra $150 a month. Manageable, he thought. He'd just cut back somewhere else. Then groceries got more expensive. Not dramatically overnight, but enough that each checkout felt slightly heavier than the last. Eggs, milk, bread, basic things, all quietly rising in price. Gas followed the same pattern. A few extra dollars each time he filled up. Nothing shocking individually, but together it added up. At first, Jake adjusted. Ate out less, drove less, tried to be careful. But careful only goes so far when everything around you keeps getting more expensive. And then came the bigger hits. His health insurance premium increased. Not by choice, not because he upgraded anything. It just went up. Then his car insurance followed. Then a subscription he forgot to cancel renewed automatically. It felt like money was leaking from places he couldn't even see. So he did what most people in his situation do. He ignored it. Not because he didn't care, but because tracking every dollar felt exhausting, because facing the full picture felt worse than pretending things were under control. Until one day, he finally sat down and looked at everything. All the numbers, all the bills, all the payments. And that's when it hit him. He wasn't just spending his money, he was already spending money he hadn't earned yet.
That realization changes something in people. Because once you understand that your future income is already committed, it doesn't feel like income anymore. It feels like obligation. Jake opened his credit card app. Balance $4,870. Another card, $2,150. Minimum payments didn't look scary at first. That's the trick. $120 here, $60 there. Feels manageable, but minimum payments are designed to keep you in the system, not to get you out of it. Most of that payment doesn't even touch the actual debt. It goes toward interest, which means next month the balance barely moves, and the cycle continues. Jake remembered the first time he used his credit card for something he couldn't afford. It didn't feel dangerous. It felt smart, convenient, normal. That's how it starts for most people. Credit cards aren't presented as risk. They're presented as tools. Build your credit score, earn rewards, get cash back. And those things are real. But what's not emphasized enough is how easy it is to cross the line. One emergency, one unexpected bill, one moment of "I'll pay it off later," and suddenly, later becomes much harder than expected. Jake didn't notice when the balance started growing faster than he could pay it down, because life kept happening. Another repair, another expense, another moment where using the card felt easier than saying no. And every time he told himself the same thing: "I'll fix it next month." But next month always came with its own problems. This is how the debt trap works. It doesn't hit you all at once. It builds slowly, quietly, until one day you realize you're stuck, and getting out feels almost impossible. Jake started noticing changes in his behavior, small things at first. He stopped checking his bank account as often, not because he didn't want to know, but because he already knew. He started timing his expenses around his paycheck. If something was due before payday, he delayed it. If something could wait, he pushed it. Everything became a game of timing, a constant juggling act, and one mistake could throw everything off. There's a term people use for this: financial stress. But that phrase doesn't fully capture what it feels like. It's not just stress, it's a constant mental load, a background process running in your mind all the time, even when you're working, even when you're trying to relax, even when you're with friends. It never fully goes away. Jake started noticing it affecting other parts of his life. At work, it became harder to focus. Simple tasks felt heavier, not because the work changed, but because his mind was elsewhere.
Running numbers, planning payments, thinking about what could go wrong. At home, it was the same. He stopped enjoying things the way he used to. Watching a movie felt different when you knew your credit card bill was due in 2 days. Even something as simple as going out with friends became complicated. Every invitation came with a calculation. Can I afford this? If I spend $30 tonight, what does that mean for the rest of the week? Sometimes he said yes. Sometimes he said no. But even when he said yes, he couldn't fully enjoy it because the cost didn't disappear. It just moved into the future. And the future was already crowded with expenses. This is something people don't talk about enough: the emotional cost of living paycheck to paycheck. It changes how you think, how you act, how you experience life. It makes everything feel temporary, unstable, like you're one step away from things falling apart. Jake wasn't alone in this. At work, he started noticing similar patterns in others. Conversations about money weren't open, but they were there, hidden between jokes, between casual comments. "I'll wait until payday. I'm broke this week. I just need to get through this month." Everyone said it lightly, like it wasn't a big deal. But underneath, there was truth, a shared experience, a quiet understanding that most people were dealing with the same thing. Different numbers, same pressure. Jake once had a conversation with a coworker who earned more than him, significantly more. And yet, that coworker said something that stuck with him. "I don't know where my money goes." At first, it didn't make sense. How could someone earning that much feel the same pressure? But then Jake started thinking about it. Higher income often comes with higher expenses: better apartment, better car, more subscriptions, more lifestyle. And suddenly the extra income disappears.
Not because it's wasted, but because it's absorbed into a more expensive way of living. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the biggest reasons why even high earners can live paycheck to paycheck. The more you earn, the more you spend. Not intentionally, not recklessly, just gradually, naturally, until your new normal becomes expensive and going backwards feels impossible. Jake started seeing this everywhere. People upgrading their lives step by step. A nicer phone, a better car, a bigger apartment. Each upgrade feels deserved, earned. But each one adds a new fixed cost, a new obligation, a new reason why your next paycheck is already spoken for. And once those costs are locked in, reducing them becomes difficult. You can't easily move out of a lease. You can't cancel a car loan without consequences. You can't just undo financial decisions overnight. So people stay in the cycle, working to support a lifestyle that feels necessary, even if it's barely sustainable. Jake began to realize something uncomfortable. It wasn't just the system. It wasn't just the economy. It was also habits, patterns, decisions repeated over time. Not bad decisions, just normal ones, the kind everyone makes. And that's what makes it dangerous, because it doesn't feel like a problem. It feels like life, until the pressure builds too high. One night, Jake sat down again. Same numbers, same accounts. But this time, something felt different. He wasn't just looking at the situation, he was starting to question it. How did it get here? Why does it feel like no matter how much he works, it's never enough? And more importantly, is there a way out? Because surviving from paycheck to paycheck might be normal, but it doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like being stuck. And deep down, Jake knew something had to change, not just for the numbers, but for his peace of mind. Because living like this isn't really living. It's just getting by.
Jake couldn't shake that feeling, that quiet question sitting in the back of his mind. Is there actually a way out of this? Because up until now, everything he had tried felt like a temporary fix. Work more hours, cut a few expenses, delay a payment, use a credit card, repeat. It kept him afloat, but it didn't move him forward. So one night, instead of just checking his balance and closing the app, he did something different. He decided to break everything down. Not roughly, not mentally, but in detail. Every dollar coming in, every dollar going out. At first, it felt uncomfortable, almost like looking at something he had been avoiding for a long time. But once he started, he couldn't stop. Income, $4,200 a month. That number looked decent on its own, but then came the reality. Taxes. After deductions, his take-home pay dropped significantly. Federal tax, state tax, Social Security, Medicare, all of it taken before he even saw the money. What actually landed in his account each month was closer to $3,200. That was the real number he was working with. Then came rent, $1,450. Almost half of his take-home income gone instantly. And this wasn't luxury living. It was a basic one-bedroom apartment in an average area. Safe, but nothing special. Then utilities, electricity, water, internet, another $250. Groceries. He tried to keep it low, around $300 to $400 a month, but prices fluctuated, and some months it went higher. Transportation. Car payment, $420. Car insurance, $180. Gas, around $200. Total, $800. And that's before maintenance, repairs, or anything unexpected. Health insurance, $280 per month. And even with that, not everything was covered. Then came the debt payments. Credit cards,
Minimum payments across multiple cards around $250. Not reducing the debt significantly, just keeping it from getting worse, for now. Subscriptions, streaming services, apps, small monthly charges he barely noticed individually. Together, they added up to nearly $100. Then, miscellaneous expenses, phone bill, occasional eating out, basic personal needs, another $200 to $300. Jake sat back and looked at the total. It didn't feel real, because when everything was added up, there was almost nothing left. Sometimes there was a small gap, a negative gap, which meant he wasn't just spending what he earned, he was slightly exceeding it every month, and that difference was being covered by debt. That's when it fully clicked. This wasn't just a temporary situation. This was a system, a structure where everything was already allocated before he even got paid, where one unexpected expense could disrupt everything, where saving wasn't just difficult, it felt impossible. Jake stared at the numbers for a long time, because for the first time, he wasn't guessing, he was seeing the full picture, and the full picture was heavy. This is something many people don't realize about living in countries like the United States. It's not just about how much things cost, it's about how everything is structured. Housing is expensive, healthcare is expensive, education is expensive. Transportation often requires owning a car, which comes with its own set of costs. And most of these are not optional, they're necessary, which means a large portion of your income is locked into fixed expenses before you even think about saving.
Do you go now and pay, or wait and hope it gets better? Jake had gone, and added another charge to his credit card, another small piece of the puzzle. Then there was something even less visible. Taxes on everyday life, sales tax on purchases, hidden fees, service charges, small percentages added everywhere. Individually, they don't seem like much, but over time, they quietly increase the cost of living. Jake realized something else. Time was also part of the equation, because when you're constantly working, constantly managing money, constantly thinking about bills, you have less time to think strategically, less time to plan, less time to learn, which means you stay in reactive mode, handling problems as they come instead of preventing them. That's another trap, not just financial, but mental. Because escaping this cycle doesn't just require money, it requires clarity, and clarity is hard to find when you're under constant pressure. Jake thought about investing. He had heard about it so many times. Stocks, index funds, retirement accounts. Everyone said it was important. Everyone said it was the key to building wealth. But every time he tried to take it seriously, the same problem came up. Where would the money come from? Investing requires surplus, and surplus didn't exist in his current situation. So it stayed as an idea, something for later, but later kept getting pushed further away. Then there was the idea of saving, emergency funds, 3 to 6 months of expenses. That's what experts recommend. Jake did the math. 3 months of his expenses would be nearly $9,000. 6 months? $18,000. He almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it felt impossible. How do you save that kind of money when you're barely breaking even each month? It felt like advice meant for a different reality, a different life. And that's where frustration begins. Because on one side, there's information, advice, strategies. On the other side, there's reality, bills, debt, limited income, and the gap between the two feels massive. Jake wasn't alone in this realization. More and more people were starting to feel the same way, working hard, doing what they were supposed to do, but not seeing the results they expected. The traditional path, study, get a job, work hard, save money, didn't feel as reliable anymore. Not because it was completely broken, but because the environment had changed. Costs had increased faster than incomes for many people. Opportunities existed, but they required knowledge, time, and often risk. And risk is hard to take when you're already struggling to stay stable. Jake leaned back in his chair. For a moment, everything felt overwhelming. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, heavy way. Like realizing you've been running on a treadmill for years, and it's not taking you anywhere. But then, something shifted, because understanding the problem, as uncomfortable as it is also the first step toward changing it. For the first time, Jake wasn't just reacting, he was seeing, clearly, where his money was going, why it felt like it disappeared, why progress felt so slow. And that clarity, even though it came with discomfort, also came with a small sense of control. Because if the system could be understood, maybe, just maybe, it could be changed. Not overnight, not easily, but gradually, step by step. Jake closed his laptop. The numbers didn't change. The situation didn't magically improve, but his perspective had. And sometimes, that's where everything begins. Not with more.
The next morning didn't feel dramatically different. Jake still woke up to the same alarm, the same room, the same responsibilities waiting for him. His bank balance hadn't magically increased overnight. His debt hadn't disappeared. His bills were still there, quietly lined up, waiting their turn. But something inside him had shifted. Not motivation, not excitement, clarity. And clarity has a strange effect. It doesn't make things easier immediately, but it makes them real. And once something is real, you can finally start dealing with it. Jake sat at his kitchen table with a notebook. Not his phone, not an app, just paper and a pen. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't reacting to his finances. He was planning. He started with one simple question. If nothing changes, where will I be in 1 year? He already knew the answer. Same place, same stress, same cycle. Maybe even worse, because debt doesn't stay the same, it grows. So doing nothing was no longer an option. But the problem was, most advice he had seen online didn't feel realistic. Just save more, cut unnecessary expenses, invest early. It all sounded good, but it didn't match his situation. You can't save money you don't have. You can't cut expenses that are already essential. And you can't invest if you're barely surviving. So instead of trying to follow perfect advice, Jake did something different. He looked for imperfect actions, small changes, not powerful on their own, but possible. He started with awareness. Every expense, no matter how small, was written down. Not judged, not restricted, just tracked. Because before you can control money, you have to see it. And what he saw surprised him. It wasn't just the big expenses that were affecting him. It was the small, consistent leaks. Coffee here, food delivery there, subscriptions he barely used. Individually, they didn't seem like a problem, but together they created pressure. Not enough to fix everything, but enough to create breathing room. So he didn't cut everything. He just adjusted. Instead of ordering food 3 times a week, he reduced it to once. Instead of multiple subscriptions, he kept one. Instead of ignoring small expenses, he became aware of them. It didn't change his life overnight, but it created space, a small gap between what he earned and what he spent. And that gap was new. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't negative at the end of the month. The next step was harder. Debt. Because debt isn't just numbers, it's emotional. Every payment feels like you're losing money instead of progressing. But Jake realized something important. Ignoring it was costing him more. Interest didn't care about his situation.
It wasn't limited to a salary. It could grow, even if slowly. Jake also changed something else, his mindset around lifestyle. He stopped chasing the idea of looking successful and started focusing on becoming stable. Because there's a difference. Looking successful is expensive. Being stable is powerful. He stopped comparing his life to others because comparison had been quietly pushing him to spend more, to keep up, to feel like he wasn't falling behind. But the truth is, most people he was comparing himself to were in similar situations. Different numbers, same cycle. And once he understood that, the pressure to keep up started to fade. Months passed, not dramatically, not like a movie transformation, but steadily. His debt didn't disappear, but it reduced. His stress didn't vanish, but it softened. His situation didn't become perfect, but it improved. And that's the reality most people don't talk about. There's no instant escape from living paycheck to paycheck, no single moment where everything changes. It's a gradual process, built on small decisions repeated consistently. Jake still had bills, still had responsibilities, still had moments of stress,
But he also had something he didn't have before: direction. Because the biggest shift wasn't in his bank account, it was in how he saw his situation. Before, everything felt like it was happening to him. Now he felt like he was slowly changing it. And that changes everything. Because when you feel stuck, you stop trying. But when you see even a small path forward, you keep going. Jake looked at his bank balance again one morning. It wasn't a huge number, but it wasn't empty either. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel anxious looking at it. Because it didn't represent survival anymore. It represented progress. Slow, imperfect, but real. Living paycheck to paycheck in America isn't just about money. It's about systems, habits, pressure, and expectations. It's about trying to build a life in an environment where the cost of living keeps rising, where mistakes are expensive, where safety nets are limited, and where the line between stable and struggling is thinner than it seems. Millions of people are in this cycle, working hard, doing their best, trying to keep up, and many of them feel the same things Jake felt: pressure, uncertainty, frustration, but also hope. Because even though the system is complex, even though the path isn't easy, change is still possible. Not instantly, not perfectly, but gradually. And that's the part most people don't see: the quiet progress, the small wins, the slow shift from surviving to stabilizing. Jake isn't rich, he isn't financially free, but he's no longer exactly where he was. And sometimes that's enough. Because moving forward, even slowly, is still moving forward. And in a world where so many people feel stuck, that matters more than anything. Because at the end of the day, the goal isn't just to escape the paycheck to paycheck cycle. It's to build a life where money stops controlling every decision, where stress isn't constant, where the future doesn't feel uncertain. And that kind of life doesn't start with a big moment. It starts with small changes, made consistently.